in a nutshell, how would you say loving yourself and understanding yourself, is that how you overcome awkwardness?
Yeah. And like giving yourself a little bit of grace, like you're not going to do it overnight. You're not going to, change overnight. And I don't ever want to not be an introvert. If I could go back in time and be an extrovert, I would say no, like, I don't want that ticket. I want the introvert ticket. Do I wish I knew back then what I know now, like what a superpower it is and how amazing it is and how many amazing skills it's given me. Yeah. But little steps, baby steps, challenging yourself to maybe do that one little thing that makes you uncomfortable, and then noticing the positive, observing the evidence that it worked for you, and just getting a little uncomfortable, occasionally. And then the uncomfortable becomes comfortable, and then you're ready to stretch again.
Hello, and welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review, tell a friend, help get the word out there. Monica Parkin is an award-winning international speaker, author of the Amazon bestseller, Overcoming Awkward, The Introvert's Guide to Networking, Marketing, and Sales. She's also a licensed mortgage broker, entrepreneur, and self-professed introvert.
Welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Monica. So happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Okay, so Monica has written a great book called Overcoming Awkward, and we are going to get into that. But first, before we do, tell us a little bit more about yourself, Monica. Your journey through being an introvert and feeling awkward to embracing that and then writing this book.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. Thanks, David. I guess it's about 7 years ago now. I went from, I was still an entrepreneur, but I was a solo entrepreneur where I really didn't have to, go out anywhere or talk to anyone. Didn't have to market myself. It was a business that just kind of sold itself, to deciding to be a mortgage broker, deciding that because I thought it would be the perfect job to work virtually from home, not have to talk to people, and wow, I did not get the memo about that career. I had no idea. I went through the whole process, took the course, everything, got hired by a brokerage, and then found out that, a very small portion of that job is writing mortgages and dealing with numbers and sitting at home. And a very large portion of it is networking, building relationships, selling yourself, getting to know people. And, I almost quit when I found out that day. It came as a very big surprise to me.
Wow. So you weren't expecting to have to get out there and find your own clients and things.
Yeah, I thought they would just be handed to me. I had no idea. And the mortgage broker that I'd always worked with, I'd literally never seen her in person, never even talked to her on the phone. We did everything by email. So I thought that was just the norm. And she was just catering to me as a very introverted client. She was matching what I wanted, but that's not the norm in the industry at all.
Yeah. So was it at this point you started to figure out that you were an introvert, or did you know before that?
I think I had an idea before that for sure. I was the mom who, wouldn't let her kids even have friends come over, because if they had their friends over, that meant I'd have to make friends with their friends' moms and I'd have to talk to them. I'd drop them off at the curb, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so I jumped into that industry. I went to my first networking event because I had to. Basically, they said, there's an event next week, you're coming, here's your ticket. Showed up at that Chamber of Commerce dinner, walked in the room, looked around, freaked out, turned around, went back and sat in my car and just kind of had a little meltdown there and tried to decide if I was going to make an excuse and go home, or like, what am I going to do here? And my coworker drove up. So, okay, I can't just say I'm sick now. I'm already here. She's seen me. I'm going to have to go in. So I go in and I'm like, you know what, you just do it. Just do what you're supposed to do. Go shake people's hands, go talk to them. So I did that thing. I, forced myself to work the room and tell everyone what a great mortgage broker I am. And I give you the best rate and right. And then, I come home at the end of the night and I'm going through all these business cards because everyone's giving me their card. I've given them my card, that thing that you do. And I'm looking at these cards and I'm like, I don't know these people. I didn't make a connection to them. What am I going to do with these cards? And I decide to throw them in the fire. And in that moment, when I'm throwing them in the fire, all of a sudden I'm like, oh no. if I'm getting rid of their cards, that means all the cards that I gave out tonight are probably landing in someone's garbage can or someone's fire. Like all that work that I did that I thought I was supposed to do, that felt horrible, that made me feel yucky, that went against everything I am, like made me really uncomfortable, didn't bring me any business. It did nothing for me. Like it had no value at all. And I think that's when I realized, A, that I have a serious problem. If I'm going to stay in this industry, I'm not going to be able to do it this way. And B, that I have to find another way to build relationships, because it's just not something that's going to work for me.
Yeah, I read that story in your book. I thought that story was awesome because I've felt the same way. And you made the point that, yeah, just walking up to someone, talking for a couple minutes, exchanging cards, that's not a relationship. That's not a true connection.
No, unless that's your skill set. Like some people are really good at that. I was telling you, I was in Toronto last week for this mortgage industry event, and I was walking around with this girl who's a total extrovert. And so I'm kind of easing my way, and I'm doing it my introvert way, which works great for me. But people would walk by and she'd be just like, hey, I haven't met you yet. Come over here. Tell me about yourself. Like, I want to learn more. And so she had this magical way of just building this connection, but that's her strength and that's not my strength. And so it's not that way doesn't work for some people, but for me, it just wasn't the right approach.
Yeah. That's the point I'm making. And I've been in the same situation where, I've watched an extroverted colleague do the same thing, and they have that gift. It doesn't happen to be ours.
Yeah.
We have our own gifts, and, we've learned to embrace those and find that thing that works for us, whether it be networking and other things. So how would you describe what does it mean to be awkward? Like, what was that like for you?
I guess, well, for me, and still sometimes, although I've come a long, long ways, and now I can find different ways to build connections with people. But for me, it was that kind of like, what do I say first? How do I do this small talk thing? Like, where do I stand? How long is appropriate to stand here and talk to someone? Like, is 5 minutes too long? Is it not long enough? Okay, well, now I've only talked to one person. Like, how do I extract myself now and go talk to the new person? Like, just all those questions, which I think for some people come really naturally. For me, they don't come naturally, and I have to really think through them step by step. They come a lot more naturally to me than they used to, just like a lot of things. When you practice them, you get better at them. But for introverts and for people that are, I guess, socially awkward, those questions are often running through your head while you're trying to have a conversation, and it makes it difficult to make a connection when you're trying to think about the logistics of all the socially acceptable things, the rules that you're supposed to follow.
Yeah, exactly. And I've definitely been there. And, part of, for me, overcoming awkward, it was understanding who I was and not trying to do it like my extroverted friend, figuring out what worked best for me. Was it at this point, how did you learn more about being an introvert and your strengths and things like that?
Yeah, just what you're saying was really my light bulb moment too, right? The be who you are, be your authentic self. And I didn't discover that on my own. I discovered that by asking some people in the industry that were super successful. I'm at the end of my first year and I'm not doing well at all. And I'm struggling and I don't even know if I want to stay in this career. And so I started phoning up these people in my industry that are doing really well and saying, like, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do differently? And, the first one says, like, just be you, be your authentic self. And I'm like, that's a load of crap. Like, give me a break. Like, and then I called the next one. They said, like, basically they all said the same thing. And at first I didn't embrace that at all. I was like, this is just this load of garbage. They just want all this business to themselves. But when I actually started to try to put that into practice in little tiny bits and pieces, like show real me, like literally let my little inner weirdo shine and show who I am to people without this fear of being judged, all of a sudden, like, I started to connect to people in ways that I've never connected to people in my life by showing the part of myself that I've always been afraid to show, whether that's, the fact that I'm a crazy goat lady and I love goats, or my weird sense of humor, or geeking out on new technology, all those things that I thought weren't cool. The reality is there's always someone else that will connect with that. And when you get a little bit vulnerable, it gives other people space to also be vulnerable. And that's where you actually make those authentic connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, that's good advice to be yourself. But a lot of times the problem with that is that you don't know yourself. you don't know who you are. And so that advice doesn't really work because you really have to know who you are and what your strengths and gifts are to make that work.
Yeah, it is a process of discovery for sure, and just trying it out a little at a time. Even if you don't know who you are, often you know who you're not. And if you can start with, look, this is who I'm not. I'm not the person that's going to walk around the room and shake everyone's hand. And, like who am I really, or what am I passionate about? Like what things are happening in the community that I'm excited about? What are the things that make me excited, and share and talk about those things, and ask other people about what makes them excited, right? Because that's where you find those commonalities.
Yeah. There are things that we are passionate about, that we have strengths in, and that's the key. So it seemed like in your book, there was just kind of a point you're talking about where you're just like, you know what, enough is enough. I'm going to live differently. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I definitely realized that this talking to people, this social awkwardness was a real problem for me, like a real roadblock. And I thought about, all the other times in my life where I've resisted change and it seemed really hard. And then I bit it off like a little bit at a time. And it gets to the point where it becomes easy, even if it's something like, I think the example I used is coffee, right? I didn't drink coffee for like the first 40 years of my life. And I was dragging around myself in the morning. I'm like, I'm going to just try coffee, and first day I hated it. The second day I hated it. The third day I'm starting to think about it. Fourth day, all of a sudden I'm craving it. I kind of did the same thing with social interactions. I kind of told myself, you know what, I'm going to just pretend that I like people. I'm going to pretend that I like relationships and connecting to people. And I'm going to start really tiny. So I started with something really, really small, like talking to the clerk at the grocery store, and then noticing the good that came out of that, like not just doing the act, but then looking for evidence that it worked for me. So, I found out something was on sale, or, talking to a random person and then getting an interesting piece of news. So sort of forcing myself to take baby steps. And then at the end of the day going, well, that worked out. And then the next day taking a bigger step, and then a bigger step and a bigger step, until all of a sudden it just feels as natural as breathing, right? It's no longer an effort. It's just part of who I am, because I've created these new neural pathways that were awkward and weird and uncomfortable at first. Like when you take a new drive to work, the first week you keep taking the wrong turn, and then your brain remembers, and all of a sudden it's natural to do that.
Absolutely. So as you were discovering that you were an introvert and trying to overcome your awkwardness, I mean, what strengths did you determine that you had as an introvert?
Yeah, one of the things that I've found out, and that research tells us that introverts are really good at, is really listening deeply to other people, like hearing other people's ideas, connecting with them, resonating with them, and having really deep conversations about things that you're both passionate about, rather than just skimming through the surface topics, but actually taking the time to dive really deep. And then the other thing is asking good questions, which leads to solutions. And, solutions always lead to great things, but that ability to just get really curious, and instead of just instantly jumping for an answer, going, well, why is this like this? And what about this? And what about this? And going down those rabbit holes and following that little string and getting to the answer. And then when you get the answer, you get the solutions. And then all of a sudden, it's exciting and magic is happening. And really cool things come from that. And I think that's definitely a strength that introverts have that's really underrated and under talked about, is that problem, deep thinking, right? That ability to go back and be still and think deeply about a problem and then go back with a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, that's how I define it, is I am a deep thinker. And I can understand that and get better at things. Like I can get better at small talk like you described. But ultimately, the purpose of my small talk is to have those deep conversations you also just described, because that's what, I don't mind doing some small talk. I definitely used to hate it, but it's really, I want to get to those deep conversations. That's the point.
Yeah, for sure. And when I've talked to other introverts about this too, that's sort of the feedback I get from them, is that they don't love small talk, but they do it to get to the deeper conversations. And when I've talked to extroverts that, own companies or manage companies, they're like, what can I do to make my introverts feel more comfortable, to make them feel included? I'm like, well, to be honest, ask them if they just like to skip the small talk, because they might prefer not to have that small talk. They might prefer to go straight to the big stuff. And that might actually make them more comfortable, even though you're trying to make them more comfortable with small talk. Some of them would just like to skip right through that and get to the good stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And again, I've definitely gotten better at it. I enjoy it sometimes. I had an extrovert one time told me that I skipped too quickly to the deep stuff, that he needed to do more small talk
and
before we started talking deep. And that was kind of foreign to me.
Yeah. And that's the balance, right? Is trying to, because you're not always going to be talking to another introvert. And so, it's trying to figure out who that person is you're talking to and how to meet them where they need to be met and find that middle ground where you both find your happy spot.
Yeah. So definitely this show is about understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, some strategies for success. And also we bust some myths here. So is there an introvert myth or two that you want to bust today?
Yeah, for sure. I think the introvert myth that I'd love to bust, that I've heard from extroverts that have read the book, that have come back and said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I had this misconception about you introverts, is that we're stuck up, that we're standing in the corner because we're snobs or we're stuck up. We don't want to talk to people. It's not that we think we're better than everyone or we're this snobby person. It's just literally they're trying to gather their thoughts and go, okay, who am I going to talk to? How am I going to start the conversation? Like, trying to work up the courage to talk to someone, not like, hey, I'm too good to talk to you. And I think that's something they get a lot, or at least in talking to extroverts that read the book, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. I've been judging people like you my whole life, thinking you're super stuck up, and you're just trying to find that, your way into the conversation.
Yeah, I've been accused of that too. And it's like, wow, that's weird. There's nothing further from the truth there, but sometimes we get read that way.
Yeah. And I think,
go ahead.
Sorry, I think even though we're talking about social awkwardness, I think introvertedness and social awkwardness are actually two different things. They often get lumped together, but I think you can be an introvert and not be socially awkward, or you can be an introvert and also be socially awkward. They don't necessarily go hand in hand.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. Absolutely. So I'm an introvert. I'm a deep thinker. I will always be introvert, deep thinker. I'm very analytical. I go into my head more often than not. Those things are not going to change for me. But there's definitely a time when I was younger where I was shy. I had a lot of anxiety. I was awkward. Learning about myself has changed all of that for me. And that's what your book is doing too. It's like, you don't have to, you're going to be an introvert, but you don't have to stay awkward. You can learn about yourself and how you work, what you want. And that's the point. Yeah. So very good distinction. Yeah. Introversion is a beautiful thing once it's understood. But if you don't understand it, you definitely can, feel like something's wrong. Most of my guests and different authors I've read have had that experience where they felt like something was wrong with them. And it takes time to embrace it and figure it out and overcome things like awkwardness or shyness or other things.
Yeah, I definitely spent many, many years thinking there's something very wrong. Like, why can't I make friends like other people can? Why can't I walk into a conversation? Why am I so tired after a social thing? Like, why is my husband excited and want to go to the next party? And I just want to go home and put my pajamas on, right? And the more you get to know yourself, the more you get to know that other people are like that. You realize that, it's that whole thing about neurodivergency, right? Like, we're just not all exactly the same, but one isn't better than the other. We just, it's the Mac and the Apple operating system. We've got these different operating systems going on, but, ultimately we're all still human.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very natural. And I could tell lots of stories of why I just know that. So you're married to an extrovert?
I am. Yeah. And,
Okay.
It's created conflict at different times in our marriage. We figured it out now. In some ways, it's been great because he can go out and hang out with his friends. And I'm never like, why did you bring me with you? I'm like, you go, I'm having a great time. But, early on in our marriage, it did create conflict because, he'd want to go out and I'd want to stay home. And how come you don't want to come with me? And I'm like, well, how come you don't want to just stay home, watch a movie? We had to kind of navigate our way through that. Now I think it's actually a good thing. It's a real yin yang balance for us, but it takes time. I think. I don't think I'd want to be in a relationship with two extroverts or two introverts, to be honest. I think that might be a challenge.
Yeah. And that's part of why it's so great to have these conversations because, definitely that situation, you weren't alone in that. There's so many people that experience that. And I've heard that from others. I've also seen it where you do learn to understand each other. I am married to an introvert and we get along very well. It's funny though, we are married a very long time, and it wasn't until I started blogging and writing about introversion, and she is my editor, and we started having better conversations, and I started to realize, oh, that's why I'm sitting close to you and I'm talking to you and you're ignoring me. It's because she was in her zone working, that's why you're staying up late because you're trying to get some quiet to get your work done. Or the funny one, when my kids were little, maybe she's going to the store and I'm like, hey, don't you want to take the kids with you? And she's like, nope.
That's awesome.
So yeah, you just got to get to know each other. And even like as introverts, we really enjoy spending time together, but we also each need our alone time too. And sometimes that's hard to navigate because that might not occur at the same time.
And do you think, because it's just curiosity for me, like, do you think it inhibits your like going out socially because you both kind of want to stay home, or does it just make you more selective about where you go so that when you go, it's like a meaningful experience and someone you really want to see rather than just going because you got an invite?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a factor. I think like you described, probably if I was married to extrovert, we might do a lot more things like that. So we probably are more selective. I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So, and
yeah.
And I don't know about you, but my kids are both like, I've got two daughters that are introverts and a son that's an extrovert. And it was interesting watching through the pandemic because, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we all had to stay home, the girls were like, I could do this. I've trained my whole life for this. Like I could do this forever. And my son is just like pacing the floor. Like, when can I go somewhere, And it was interesting to see the reaction from both.
Yeah, we had a similar experience because I have 3 kids, 2 extroverts and 1 introvert. And in the pandemic, my wife has always worked from home ever since we started having kids. And so now we're in her territory, in her space. And I had a couple of kids that were now in online school and they hated it. And just everybody's kind of stressed out anyway. So it was a rough first year to get to navigate that. And I had not worked from home before. And it wasn't a really good, like a lot of introverts dream of working at home, right? But for me, it wasn't a really good experience because I had a full house all the time.
That was my experience also. I love the idea of working from home until all of a sudden I had my husband home and the kids home and, people in my space and interrupting me and what about this and what about that? And I'm like, just like, because I've got an open office and on one side it's living room, the other side it's kitchen. There's no doors on it. And yeah, it was a really frustrating time for me. And I'm sure for them too. And for a lot of people, I think got a new appreciation of what working from home actually can look like. Yeah.
Cause at work, I have a door. At home, I'm in the open office too. And, and people are knocking on the door. I'm like, I'm working. I can't get the door, or can you take our daughter this place or that place? I'm like, I can't. I'm working.
Yeah.
So,
And it's that end of the day closure too, right? When you work away from home, 5 o'clock comes and all your coworkers are shutting down the computers and leaving. You're triggered to go home. When you're working from home, there's this temptation. Well, I'll just do another half hour and another half an hour. And before you know it, it's 8 o'clock at night and you're still deep into that project. And I think that's something as introverts, we tend to get into something and then have a hard time getting out. That it's that deep thinking piece, right?
Yeah, for sure. But the other thing that I found was I definitely recharged on my drive home. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, like you're talking about, here I am, I'm working. I don't need to drive home, but I still need that space. I need that separation where I can take some time. And so that was something I definitely had to navigate too. How do you find that time when you're already home? You've been home you're not going anywhere. So how do you find that space? That was a challenge for me.
Yeah, you don't get that transition time. And I don't know about you, but I love audiobooks on my way home or a podcast or something to just distract my mind from work and go through that transition, set myself up to come home. And yeah, you lose that half hour, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever your commute is, where you get to just decompress.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's nice not to drive, especially right now with gas prices, but that was something I had to figure out.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to write this book, Overcoming Awkward?
Yeah, it was a pandemic book for sure. I was sitting home one day on a Saturday afternoon, just kind of scrolling through social media, and I saw this thing for a 30-day book writing challenge. And I was like, 30 days? And by the way, I also have some serious ADHD. So I get this hyperfixation thing happening where I get into an idea. And then at the end of a certain amount of time, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm on to the next one. And, I mentioned it to my son, and he's like, Mom, like 30 days, like that is the amount of time that you can hyperfixate on something. You could probably knock this off in 30 days. And I think it was like $100. So it was like not so much that it was unattainable, but just enough that if I didn't finish it, I'd feel like I threw away that $100. So every day they'd send me a new assignment. But the first day's assignment, at that point, I didn't even know what I was going to write it on. But the question was, like, what's something that you've overcome? Like, what is an obstacle that you have overcome that you have firsthand experience that you can share with someone? And immediately my thought was, it's this social awkwardness, this introvertedness, this part of me that I thought was broken that I realized is actually my superpower. This is what I want to talk about. And that's where the book came from.
Very nice. And I should have read the subtitle too, The Introvert's Guide to Networking, Marketing, and Sales. And that's definitely, you share in the book how you've brought this new understanding into the various aspects of your life.
Yeah, I went from that first year in sales where I had literally nothing to, exceeding my own wildest expectations in terms of clients and referrals and meeting targets and growing my business way beyond what I thought I could. And by not doing those traditional things that I was told to do, but by really just cultivating relationships one at a time.
Yeah. So you said when extroverts read your book, they're like, oh, I understand you, or I understand better. And I had that experience with my book too, where, people would say, oh, I understand introversion a little bit better. Was there anything else that surprised you about feedback that you got?
Yeah. One of the things that really surprised me is the amount of introverts that are in really high performing roles, like that are really, really successful about what they do, that I didn't know were introverts. Like they would private message me and go, hey, I read the book. It was awesome. I'm not leaving a public comment because I don't want my boss or my coworkers to know I'm an introvert, because it's not cool to be an introvert in sales. But I really loved it. And I totally related to everything in it. And I thought, how interesting that there's so many introverts out there that are killing it, but they're afraid to say so because there's like this negativity around being an introvert. Like if you're an introvert, you can't accomplish things, or you can't get out there and build relationships, when the reality is, like, some of the people in my industry that are really, really good at what they do are these total introverts, and nobody knows.
Yeah, that's why I do this work, because there's so many misunderstandings. And I've had a lot of experiences like that too, where it's funny, they're confiding in me, just like you said, they're telling me this secret, and I'm like, I know you're an introvert because I know what it is. And I tell them, what makes you brilliant is that you're an introvert, that you are thinking about things. You're deep thinking about things. You're solving problems. You're coming up with great ideas. That's what makes you brilliant. Don't be ashamed of it,
Yeah.
And we got a lot of work to do around that, Monica.
Yeah. And misconceptions, right? Because even now people look at me that maybe didn't know I wrote the book, and they see me out there speaking and doing things and getting involved in stuff. And then they see the title of the book and they're like, no way, like there's no way you're an introvert and you're speaking to 1,500 people. But like one has nothing to do with the other. At least for me as an introvert, it's really hard for me to have those little small talky conversations, but I can talk to a group of 1,500 people, no problem. I'm in my happy place there. I'm expressing ideas. I'm expressing deep thoughts. I'm sharing things. That's my zone, And I think there's a lot of introverts that are phenomenal public speakers because there isn't this back and forth in the conversation. It's just, I'm going to share my idea and you get to listen to me. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's always a funny misconception too, that they say, oh, well, you're a speaker or you're a podcaster, or like you're an introvert. How could you do that? But no. And I say this a lot. It's like, well, actually, I have a lot to say because I'm an introvert, because I'm always thinking. And I love speaking too. I do need to prepare differently than my extroverted friend might. I do need to think about what I'm going to say, but I do love that speaking, and we do have things that we want to share.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we talked about networking and how you threw your business cards into the fire. and how that really, just understanding yourself has just changed the way you network. How's it changed how you work in marketing and sales, as you write about in the book?
Yeah, well, one of the sort of catchphrases I've come up with along the way that I really feel is super relevant is this idea that people notice people who notice them. Rather than me just going out there and selling myself, this is why you should buy my stuff, whatever, but noticing what other people are doing, either in my industry, in my community, whatever, elevating other people, saying, hey, so-and-so's got this thing going on, you should check it out, or, well done, whatever, leave someone a review, like these little tiny things that are totally free that cost you nothing. When someone notices you, like it triggers this cascade of feel-good chemicals in your brain. You feel amazing, but B, it makes you want to get to know that person more. Like when I notice someone else, they immediately are like, well, who's this Monica person? Like, I want to get to know them, right? Even when you reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to be on my podcast? Now I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm listening to your podcast and I'm stalking you on LinkedIn. And now all of a sudden I'm interested in you. Because it's just this human thing that happens, this kind of, I don't know if it's reciprocity or if it's curiosity, but, people notice people who notice them. So instead of me talking about myself now, I spend a lot of time talking about other people, elevating other people. How can I help you? How can I help you grow? Who can I connect you to? And out of those come all these wonderful organic relationships and connections.
Yeah. And people absolutely want to be seen and valued. We all do. Introverts, extroverts, we all want to make connections. And that's just so important. And so, how has that changed the conversations that you have? I know you wrote a lot about that.
Totally. Yeah. Like I never go into conversation talking about myself anymore or what I can do for someone. I go into conversations now with curiosity, like, what do you do? Why do you do it? Like, what makes you excited about your business, or who can I connect you to? I think a story maybe I share in the book is, I ran into this lady in an event who has a food blogging business. Like she blogs about food and wine, and she has food allergies. And so I immediately thought, well, I could connect you to so-and-so over there. She does food tours. And I connected the two of them. Didn't think anything more of it. But, in the next 2 years, I got business from both those people because they remembered who connected them. And, when you grow your own community, or when you grow other people's community, industry, business, you grow your own, right? That's like that. I think I use this real estate analogy too, right? If I have this beautiful house in this beautiful neighborhood and I take amazing care of it, but I look across the street and my neighbor's house is falling down, or their lawn's not cut because they broke their leg or whatever, or my community is not doing well, all of a sudden my property value is going to go down, right? Like if I, extend a hand and go, hey, can I mow your lawn for you today? His house looks better. All of a sudden my property value goes up. When your community is strong, when your industry is strong, when the people around you are doing amazing, you're doing amazing. And it's that reflecting stuff back to yourself by looking after what's around you.
Yeah, absolutely. As introverts, I think one of our big needs is we do need some time. We've talked a little bit about this through this conversation. We do need some time to recharge, but also other times maybe to focus or dream or make plans. How do you find that time for yourself?
Yeah, I have learned to schedule it. I made a big mistake when my book first came out and I got myself scheduled on all this stuff, podcasts, TV shows, whatever. And I did that for 2 weeks straight, and I was running off this adrenaline high of all these interviews. And then I just crashed. I'm like, I don't want to talk to another person. I don't want to, I had completely drained my sort of mental battery. And I was like, I can't think straight. I can't work on the things that I want to work on, the things I'm passionate about. I just couldn't. I was completely they talk about this introvert battery where you wear out your social, it was dead, it was depleted. And I almost had to take a month off and just do nothing and just sort of get back into my own groove. So I'm really careful now that if I'm doing, whether it's a speaking engagement or a community event or a podcast or even writing an article, that I don't do more than 2 a week of those things that require deep thought and social interaction, and that I give myself time in every day to recharge, or to have those deep thoughts and ideas, or to just read a book that has no value for me, that's just for fun, or listen to a podcast that's just for fun, that doesn't have an end goal. That's just a chance for me to just unwind and catch up and really not overschedule myself, because I really pay the price for it when I do. And it actually makes me less productive in the end.
Yeah. And that's what you got to figure out is, all right, what energizes me? What drains me? And what do I do when when I'm drained?
Yeah. I have this great writing meditation group I do too. And it's at night after my kids and my husband go to bed. It's like 11 o'clock at night because it's in the UK and it's their morning. But I do it like 3 days a week. And we literally just like write a question like, what do I want to do today? Or what's my plan for today? And then we turn this music on for 10 minutes. We just write the answer. And the answer is supposed to come from you, from your subconscious, like the quiet part of your brain. And it's so cool because the answers I get when I do those writing meditations are like kinder and gentler and nicer than anything I could come up when I'm busy and frenzied and running around. It's like, just pour a cup of tea, give yourself some time. Like it's gentle and kind. And so to let that kind inner voice shine through a couple nights a week for me in the evening after everyone else has gone to bed, and to listen to that sort of wise, kind inner self. It sounds a little woo-woo, but it's really helpful for me to just recharge and connect, to me.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you've come up with these things that work for you. How do you set these appropriate boundaries with other people so that you can have what you need?
Yeah, well, I try to say yes instead of no. Like I try not to say, no, I can't do that. I say, yeah, absolutely. How about 2 weeks from now? And I use Calendly a lot now too, that app. And so I block off times when I'm not available and I'll just send someone the link. And literally the only time they can book is, times that I have open. And I make sure that the times that I've left open have times built around them for me to have time for me or time to work on the projects or the writing or the other stuff that I want to do. So then I'm not saying, no, I'm too busy. I'm just saying, yeah, for sure. Here's the link. And oops, I'm sorry. There's nothing available in there for 3 weeks. But, it's a way of saying no without actually saying no.
Yeah.
Because I am a people pleaser. Yeah. Sorry.
That's some great advice. And, I block off some time every day, like first thing, but then sometimes I will go back in and just, maybe I know that thing's going to be draining to me. Let me just block off a little time right after that. Or like you said, if people want some of your time, they can find you on your calendar. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, it helps me for sure to set that boundary. And yeah, like after this podcast, I booked an hour off because I know after I do a podcast like this, as much as I've enjoyed our time together and I'm going to, I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to want to have a deep conversation with someone right after this. Like I'm not going to want to have a business call or even a personal call. I'm going to want to go for a walk or go for a drive or read a book and just let myself process it too. And think about the things that we've talked about and how they apply in my life and just sort of run it through my mind.
Yeah, same here. And so I give myself always definitely an hour before so I can get in the right space and kind of charge up ahead of time. But yeah, you're right. After this, I'm not going into another podcast. I will need to take a break. And again, I'm very much enjoying this conversation, but that's a good example. You just got to know yourself.
Yeah. It's those healthy boundaries and knowing yourself and setting up systems and processes so that you've got the time to do those things. Yeah.
So important to know yourself, but also in your book that you wrote that you learned the value of loving yourself. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, like I said, when I was younger, it was always, well, what's wrong with me? And why can't I make friends or why don't, whatever. And now, honestly, I have more friends than I could possibly count. Like I could pick up a phone on any given day and call someone because I've managed to build so many relationships over the years. But just like loving me, crazy, weirdo, introverted me, like just being able to go, yeah, you know what, you're awesome, just exactly as you are. You don't need to change. You don't need to pretend to be someone else. The other thing is when we're pretending to be someone else, like our brain knows that we're lying to ourselves. Like it's like we've got all these circuits, like having a computer with all these windows open in the background. As soon as I try to pretend to be someone I'm not, I actually get more awkward and I get more uncomfortable and I have a difficult time communicating because I'm trying to remember all these fake details. When I'm just me, authentic me, what you see is what you get. The conversations flow easier, words flow easier, ideas flow easier because I'm not trying to remember all these little lies or these, this facade that I want people to know about. I'm just being me. I'm just playing movie reels from my own memories, from my own self. speak that way too. When I'm a speaker, I don't have a script. I just tell stories, and those stories are where people connect to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think loving yourself is a big piece of overcoming awkwardness. And again, we're not talking about overcoming introversion, because I will always be an introvert, but I've learned to be strong, just like you're saying, and understanding myself. And that's helped me overcome awkwardness and shyness and other things. Is there anything else, like in a nutshell, how would you say loving yourself and understanding yourself, is that how you overcome awkwardness?
Yeah. And like giving yourself a little bit of grace. Like, you're not going to do it overnight. You're not going to, change overnight. And I don't ever want to not be an introvert. If I could go back in time and be an extrovert, I would say no. Like, I don't want that ticket. I want the introvert ticket. Do I wish I knew back then what I know now, like what a superpower it is and how amazing it is, and how many amazing skills it's given me? Yeah. But little steps, baby steps, challenging yourself to maybe do that one little thing that makes you uncomfortable, and then noticing the positive, observing the evidence that it worked for you, and just getting a little uncomfortable, occasionally. And then the uncomfortable becomes comfortable, and then you're ready to stretch again.
Yeah, I like that. It's you're stretching, because sometimes people say get out of your comfort zone, but I'm like, oh, really? It's stretching, because if you're changing your thoughts, you're saying, you know what, I can do this kind of thing. And you're expanding and making things easier. And so the next time it's not a difficult thing.
Yeah. And not so far out of your comfort zone that you have a total meltdown, right? Like, if I had fear of spiders, I wouldn't throw myself in a pit full of spiders and go get over it, Monica, right? Like, I would start by maybe watching a documentary about spiders and getting used to seeing them on TV. And then maybe I'd get close to one. Like, I wouldn't just throw myself into the most terrifying situation I could imagine. I would baby step it a little bit at a time. And I think that's what we need to do with our fears in our own personal lives as well.
Yeah. And I also like that you said you got to give yourself some grace, because no matter how far you come, you're going to have some awkward moments.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I still do. And that's cool. Like, and that's part of me too. And now I can joke about it and go, oh, I'm just being awkward. Like, I wrote the book about it, so I'm allowed. Yeah.
Like, sometimes I do get lost in my thoughts, and I might pass by someone and not notice them. And, they say, hey, what's up? And I just acknowledge, how I was just lost in my thoughts. Or like when we were starting this conversation, I was on mute, and I know everybody's had that experience for the last couple of years of, you may say something really important and nobody heard. And I mean, it happens to all of us. So, it can be awkward, but just let it roll off, And I think that's a big piece to all this too, is understanding who you are, loving yourself, and giving yourself some grace. So I think that's amazing. Monica, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot today. Where can people find out more about your book and the work that you're doing along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's actually becoming one of my favorite podcasts pretty quick. But you can find me at monicaparkin.ca. I'm Canadian, so it's .ca. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere. But monicaparkin.ca will give you a link to the book. I also have a podcast. It's actually just for women, or I'd invite you on. But it's called Juggling Without Balls. It's for women that juggle a lot of responsibilities. Nothing to do with business. It's just a fun podcast to talk about some of the challenges of living a busy life. But yeah, it's monicaparkin.ca, and it's on Audible as well.
Very nice. Oh, it has been a pleasure talking with you today, Monica.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com, or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media channels. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the 4-letter Myers-Briggs code, and you can also have the option of purchasing the full report if you'd like to learn more. I'll add a link to the show notes. So many great things about being an introvert, and we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs, and be strong.